effects of lung disease. The American Lung Association isn't just fighting for air, we're fighting for all the things that make it worth breathing, and we can use your help. See what you can do at fightingforair.org.
Whether you own a local business or a global one, you know that these days, generating growth is a challenge. By teaming with Bank of America, you'll not just stay ahead of the curve, you'll move it. With access to experts, award-winning insights, and business solutions so powerful, you'll make every move matter, locally and globally. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. What would you like the power to do? Copyright 2023 Bank of America, N.A.
One Mississippi, two Mississippi.
Keep counting at those stop signs, Alex. Full stop and doesn't go until she counts to 5, McSweeney. Because you are a safe driver. And like most drivers who sign up for Snapshot from Progressive, which customizes your rate for how and how much you drive, you could earn a discount for your good driving. So don't turn into an Alex rolling stop and goes whenever she wants, McSweeney. Because once an Alex full stop and doesn't go until she counts to 5, McSweeney, always an Alex full stop. Well, you know the rest. Sign up for Snapshot today.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Snapshot not available in all states or from all agents.
Portions of the following program were pre-recorded.
Your home for Villanova basketball is WDAS and WD273D. Fox Sports Radio Philadelphia. Sports talk that has never been done before in Philadelphia.
You shut up, I'm talking to you!
We're breaking down the live action and helping you make your live wagers at the right moment.
Right here, right now.
Follow all the action right now on The Line Change with Jon Jansen.
I don't think it's any surprise that we finally see the trade go down, but Aaron Rodgers is officially a New York Jet, with him being traded from the Green Bay Packers to New York. Now, we've known about this. It has been frustratingly annoying just to hear whether or not it's going to happen. All the talks between the Packers GM and what the Jets GM was saying, and is this actually going to get done? It was just a lot of, we don't care. We already hear enough of Rodgers. Already hear enough of him on the Pat McAfee show. It's enough. Just get it done. Finally, it's done, and we can talk about the trade. And the trade, obviously, being Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets. Now, the Green Bay Packers getting in that pick number 13, so they do a bit of a pick swap with the Jets. So the Jets will get the 15th pick from the Packers. Packers move up 2 spots, get the 13th pick. They also get a second-round pick this year, which is the 42nd overall pick in the draft, and a 6th-round pick. A conditional 2024 second-round pick as well. That could become a first if Rodgers plays 65% of the plays. And, of course, the Jets get Aaron Rodgers, number 15 pick, and the 5th-round pick. To be honest, I keep hearing this is a lot. You're always going to pay a lot for Aaron Rodgers, and it's always going to be too much. Did they really pay that big of a price here? Because usually when these quarterback moves are made, and we've seen this with the Rams, we've seen this with Deshaun Watson, we've seen this a couple of other times, that teams kind of handicap themselves a little bit because they will get the short-term value, but really ruin the long-term. And we're seeing that with the Rams. Rams got really good 1-year value out of Matthew Stafford. Year number 2, injuries, and doesn't play for most of the season. And the Rams look terrible. And the Rams went all in. But the Jets are not in that bad of a situation, considering they have a lot of young talent, and they've drafted somewhat well in previous years. And really, it's just this year's draft. And it's not that bad for this year's draft because they still get the 15th overall pick. So they're picking in the top 15, which is still pretty good. You're getting a good player, a first-round talent type player in the 15th overall pick. But then also, you're only giving up a first-round pick for next year. Now, the Jets, and a lot of this has to do with the context of the situation, because it's not like the Jets didn't have to do this, and they could have maybe drafted a quarterback. They could have done something different other than getting Aaron Rodgers. The Jets aren't in that position. The Jets tried their hand at a second overall pick quarterback. They tried their hand at getting the rookie and building that way, which has been profitable for some teams, and they missed. Flat out whiffed. And it's not like they have any value in getting rid of that second overall pick that they drafted in Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson just sucks. And so they put themselves already in a bad position because of that and kind of forced their hand here. They had to get a veteran quarterback because with the team as they are now, since they were able to draft a lot of players, since they were able to get a lot of draft picks and acquire them in ways that now they have a young team, they have a lot of talent offensively and also a good defense as well that Robert Saleh has done an excellent job with. You don't have the luxury to just, okay, well, let's either rebuild again, trade a bunch of draft picks, and trade up. It would have cost more. You're making another long-term decision again that you already wasted one valuable resource on. Then they would have to go all the way back up again if they wanted to get another young quarterback. Other than that, what's the option? You going to do what the Colts do? You going to get the Matt Ryans of the world, the Phillip Rivers of the world? I know you could say Aaron Rodgers is potentially the same thing as those guys, but he's not. He's better. He had a thumb injury last year. I imagine he's going to be much better this season than he was previously last year. And also last year, the Packers weren't good. We knew going into that season, they got rid of Devontae Adams, and then we looked at the rest of their wide receiver group and said, who? Who's going to replace that? Who is going to be good on that offense? Nobody was. And so you pair the injury with the lack of talent, and then you get whatever the Green Bay Packers were last year, which was not very good. I know Aaron Rodgers comes with a lot of baggage, and he comes with an annoying side of him that nobody cares for, unless you really like him on the Pat McAfee show that much. I get all of the baggage that he comes with. But what else are the Jets going to do? And I feel like they handcuff themselves even more if they try and go back up and redo the mistake that they made a few years ago with Zach Wilson. That number 2 overall pick, once that went bad and once Zach Wilson didn't pan out, this whole thing was thrown awry. And I think this is the best possible solution. And they're still getting a first-round pick this year. They can even trade that first-round pick to get more picks. We've seen this a lot with Howie Roseman and how he does this. Howie Roseman sort of got the quarterback right with Carson Wentz because at least in year number 2, they went to a Super Bowl, and a large part of it was the way he played in the regular season. But still, that went very poorly. And so you didn't get the long-term investment that you're supposed to get once you have a quarterback that you put all these resources in goes bad. Put money, draft picks, all of that. And Howie Roseman was able to smartly rebuild. And we've seen this over and over and over again, that he's able to find ways to compile draft picks, that he's able to make the right trades, and you can rebuild pretty quickly. But the thing is, it's going to take a couple of years. And for the Eagles, it took a couple of years. For the Jets, if they really want to find the quarterback that they want, and they really want to get all the draft picks and resources for that, it's going to take a couple of years. The Jets at least have a good offense to surround Aaron Rodgers with. Garrett Wilson's good. They get Allen Lazard, who is a fine number 2. Wasn't a number 1 like he came into last year in Green Bay, but a good number 2. I wish they would have had Elijah Moore, excuse me. But they don't, and I think that's a bit of a miss. But I think Mecole Hardman's not bad as well. I thought the talent was very good, just need to stay healthy, and I think towards the end we started to see how much of an impact he really was for Kansas City. And then, of course, you get Breece Hall and some really good running backs behind him as well. And we saw the defense last year. This is a team that won 7 games last year, and they had no idea who their quarterback was. Mike White, we were all calling the next guy in the Jets, or at least some. I think, hey, he might be serviceable enough to get him to the playoffs, and he wasn't. Those are 2 bad quarterbacks in Mike White and Zach Wilson. They needed a quarterback. They already went through the draft to do it. They already went through those means. They couldn't do it again. Couldn't afford it again. It's a lot more to get that number 2 overall pick or number 3 overall pick if they wanted to, let's say, get a CJ Stroud or to get an Anthony Richardson. It would cost more to get that draft pick than it would Aaron Rodgers. At least now, if this investment goes poorly, you're only setting yourself up for failure for the next 2 years. When if you invest again in a top draft pick, you pretty much are stuck again with nothing and in the same spot. And it's even going to be worse to dig yourself out of it than it was the last time. The Jets were forced into this. The Jets, I think, had to do it. And I think it's a quarterback worth investing into that I don't think you're ruining yourself long-term for. They already have a lot of guys in place. This is a pretty good roster. And I think it's a roster that with Aaron Rodgers in it now can compete in the AFC East. And still, they get a first-round draft pick this year. And if things go well and Aaron Rodgers does work out, you're only missing out on a first-round pick next year. And if you do that, then Aaron Rodgers is going to make that draft pick worthless anyway. They're going to be drafting in the mid to late 20s if this works out. I don't see a scenario, or it'll be a tough scenario to imagine, that Aaron Rodgers plays through the 65% of the snaps, which is the conditional part of that second-round pick, to make it a first-round pick. There's not many scenarios in my head to where Aaron Rodgers plays the entire season and he's healthy. And with that roster, the Jets don't at least make the playoffs. And it's the division to me that looks tough for sure because Buffalo was good last year and they have Josh Allen. Miami was really good last year, just had injuries to their quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. But the Bills are getting worse. They're not getting better. Josh Allen's not getting better, by the way. I know there's this love affair with Josh Allen, but to be honest, he hasn't really been that good since that breakout year that he had. I mean, he still does some wildly crazy things that no quarterback can do in the NFL. And it's worth, obviously, Buffalo to keep that guy. And that guy is going to win you some games and win you a lot of games. We saw it last year. Buffalo went 13-3. We knew that 13-3 was a little bit fraudulent. They go into the playoffs. They barely beat a Miami team that's playing a backup quarterback. And then they lose to Cincinnati, and they didn't have a chance. They were beat badly by Cincinnati. That's a team we knew had issues going into the playoffs, and I think a lot of those issues were Josh Allen's inconsistency. I mean, the guy for 2 years straight, 63.3% completion percentage. His interceptions have gone through the roof the last 2 years. He had 15 in 2021, 14 in 2022. So, like, I get he can do some spectacular things on an NFL field. But it's not like he's getting better. And that, at least, can counter the fact that Buffalo's roster is not getting better. Now, Miami's roster is good. I like Miami's roster. They've done a lot to it. They have the wide receivers, which you would want for any team that's competing for a championship. You know, they have a good defense. But what they're missing is a healthy quarterback. And a quarterback that I think is good. But those are 2 or 3 horrendous concussions that he had. And I have no idea how his body's going to react this year. So the AFC East, yeah, I could say it's good. And it could be a tough division. But it's certainly a winnable one. It's a vulnerable one. Not in the same way that the AFC South is. But it's a division where I see 2 teams at the top that I would have some major concerns about heading into this year. And in comes the Jets, and their biggest worry is, well, how much has Aaron Rodgers regressed as a quarterback? Has he Russell Wilson regressed? Or was he Tom Brady at the end of his time in New England regressed? Like, his stats weren't that great, and Brady was just kind of getting beat up because of a really bad offense. And then Brady goes into an offense that actually has talent. And what do you know? Talent helps. And the Jets have at least a bit of that. Not in the same way that Tampa Bay did. Tampa Bay was kind of loaded when Brady went in there. Still, the situation called for the Jets as they are now. And as they've messed up already at getting a franchise quarterback, that getting a guy that's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league for years now, coming off of, albeit not his best season, but still, I would like to think there is something left in the tank there, that it's not completely empty, and this guy elevates your team in a way that most quarterbacks can't. And the same, Phillip Rivers couldn't elevate Indianapolis like that. This isn't the Indianapolis route. Indianapolis wanted to get veteran quarterbacks and get it cheaply. And they did with Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers. If you want to get actually a quarterback that could elevate your team, you have to pay up a bit. And yeah, the Jets paid up, but considering the price they would have had to pay to move up in the draft and get a number 2, number 3 overall pick to get one of the top quarterbacks, or to go through that all again, I don't think it's worth it. When your team already with 2 bad quarterbacks kind of look good, I think it's worth investing in that kind of quarterback for this team right now for the next year or two. Obviously, it's a bonus if Aaron Rodgers continues to play and he doesn't retire after 1 or 2. I don't think he's going to retire after 1 year. I knew he was close, but I don't believe anything Aaron Rodgers says. And I'm sure Tom Brady has thought about retiring for probably 5 to 7 years, and he finally did it. I'm sure Aaron Rodgers has thought about retiring. I imagine, though, this gives him new life. There's a rejuvenation to it. And if they do show some success this year, Rodgers is probably going to want to run that back because year 2 is always going to be better, most likely. If you get 2 years out of Aaron Rodgers, it works. This is only hurting you for a couple of years. If Aaron Rodgers plays more than that, you won the deal. And if he plays at a certain level, obviously he doesn't have to be Aaron Rodgers that won a Super Bowl. He doesn't have to be Aaron Rodgers that has been MVP and the best player in the league at times. He doesn't have to be that guy. Tom Brady wasn't that guy in Tampa Bay. Tom Brady wasn't the best quarterback in the league in Tampa Bay. I knew he was close to winning an MVP, but he was still really good. And when you have talent around a really good quarterback, one that also has a lot of experience, good things happen. I think the Jets have that kind of team for Rodgers. And if Rodgers can play at that level, at a high level, doesn't have to be his MVP self, but a high level, can be really good. Good things are going to happen for the Jets that haven't happened for them in a very, very long time. I keep hearing the price is too high. The price is too high because they got it wrong the first time. And considering the situation, it's really not that high of a price to pay. Tune into The Line Change, Fox Sports The Gambler. Follow us at FoxPHL Gambler on Twitter. My name is Jon Jansen. Follow me at JJansen34. Coming up next, we'll get into the Aaron Rodgers trade with Mark Henry Jr. because I think he disagrees with me on my assessment of it. So we'll talk with Mark Henry Jr. about that. But the NFL draft is coming up, and I want to talk with Mark. Mark is going to be a big part of our NFL draft coverage all throughout the week. I'm going to be taking over the Daily Ticket on Thursday and Friday. Mark is going to be a big part of that. Hopefully an in-studio appearance on Friday. Need to get NFL draft talk started for NFL draft week. And who better to do that with Mark Henry Jr.? He joins me next. Let's get what he thinks. I've been hearing defensive linemen. Of course, the Bijan Robinson chatter continues. The Eagles, what are some options that they will have at number 10? Not just who they are going to take, but what are some options that they will have? What will they need to think about? We'll ask Mark Henry Jr. that question and more NFL draft questions coming up next on The Line Change.
Fox Sports Radio, The Gambler. Now, total traffic for Philadelphia.
Spot you on Avoid 95 northbound, barely moving, approaching the airport up past Broad Street, where only the left lane gets by a crash. Further north 95, so Betsy Ross to Bridge, southbound heavy Cotman to Bridge, and Ridley Park to the Commodore Barry. Fluid southbound heavy Brimall to Media Wildborn, northbound slow 95 past McDade, the westbound Schuylkill Jen University to the Vine Expressway, and City to Belmont, eastbound heavy Montgomery Drive to South.
Welcome back to the Line Change, Fox Sports The Gambler. We're going to have tons of draft coverage for you this week. On Friday, Green Legion is going to be live at least for the number 10 overall pick, and I'm sure maybe a little bit more. Green Legion's going to be live starting at 8 o'clock for the NFL Draft on Thursday. And then Friday, I'm hosting the Daily Ticket Thursday and Friday. And Friday, you're going to at least hear appearance. I don't know if it's in studio or not yet, but at least you're going to hear from our next guest and breaking down all things day one of the draft, and then, of course, previewing day two. We got to talk NFL Draft, though. When we do that with Mark Henry Jr. You can hear him on the Tough Cover radio show every Saturday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. following Sports Here, There, and Everywhere, live from Parks Casino. You can hear him every Saturday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Follow him at Mark Henry Jr. _ He is our draft guru here on The Gambler, and he's joining me on the Gambler hotline. I'll start over with this, Mark, because I know we'll get into the Aaron Rodgers conversation, and I know we disagree a bit on that. But what are you most excited about for the NFL Draft?
I guess it's about the second pick, because that's going to be the domino that changes everything. Texans are leaning towards Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson at the number 2 pick, which to me feels crazy that you're not going to go and draft a quarterback when you're up this high and you have picks forward. I think you could really jumpstart your rebuild and get DeMeco Ryan started off the right way, and you could compete. Respectability in that division, but I guess they're buying into the fact that you can wait till next year and get Caleb Williams. Nobody is higher. But the one thing I will say, and I always say this, is I would never be the GM that's saying, oh, we'll wait and get it next year. We'll get the quarterback next year. I mean, they were talking about it on a podcast. I can't remember which one it was that I was listening to, but I mean, people thought Matt Barkley was like a surefire number 1 pick at this stage.
I remember that. Yes.
The year before his draft, he went in the 4th round. I mean, how many times have we seen that? We've seen that so many times. I mean, Carson Strong was an assumed 1st round pick, and then he doesn't get drafted. There's been a lot of guys like that go in the day. Was supposed to be the number 1 pick. He ended up going day 2, day 3. So I think that it's a lot to project, especially at the quarterback position where faults can become so obvious. Williams in game 3 next year. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's a rock star. But let's say a defensive coordinator throws the coverage out there that he really struggles with. The rest of the country is going to copy it, and that's going to put bad tape out there. And then you're going to hear the same QB analyst saying you should wait until next year to get Caleb Williams, talking about how he's actually not even QB1 anymore in the draft. So I definitely hate the whole let's wait until next year to get the quarterback. When you need a quarterback, you should go get the quarterback
as quickly as you can.
You don't draft someone you don't believe in, but if it's within reason, you have the second pick and there's 4 options. At a certain point, if there's a quarterback they don't believe in, that's a you problem, Houston Texans. There's a couple good prospects here, and I'm not a Will Levis guy, but the other 3, like, you can talk yourself into the other 3. So I really don't like that they're going to do that. And especially if you're going to take Anderson or Wilson, they should be trading down. So that if they make that pick at 2, where you just sit there and you ignore the value of your draft capital and you take an edge rusher at the number 2 pick, that's a terrible job by the Houston Texans.
Does this feel like that they're just trying to smoke and mirrors here and not play their hand? Or, I mean, are they really not thinking about CJ Stroud, do you think? I feel like it'd be crazy if they didn't take CJ Stroud.
I don't know anymore. I don't know what I think, because the Texans, they're completely so there's a lot of mystery going on. And the smoke screen thing, this is a week of smoke screens. Beware of everything you hear this week, to be quite honest. But what's the smoke screen here? Like, who are they attracting to do what if they are saying they're taking Wilson or Anderson? The only thing that I've heard that makes any sort of conspiratorial sense is maybe they are still going to take a quarterback at 2. They want people to believe that if you trade up to 3, you're getting your pick of the litter of the rest of the quarterbacks. And what they want is they're going to take one, and then someone's going to trade up to 3 and take one, and that's going to leave Indy holding the bag. To me, that's a galaxy to get at your division rival, to be quite honest. Maybe it's true. I don't think the Texans are that smart. And so I just don't necessarily, unless it's take.
Talking with Mark Henry Jr. on the Gambler Hotline. You can follow him at Mark Henry Jr. _ So if it's not CJ Stroud, could they be thinking another quarterback? I think I have in mind, obviously, Anthony Richardson. I mean, who we hear from at times, some of the media and some scouts that love the guy and think he might be the best quarterback even in this draft. Is there a chance that, I mean, there's a real curveball thrown and they draft Anthony Richardson, and would that be something you would be okay with?
Yeah, it's definitely something I'd be okay with. I would much rather them take Anthony Richardson than anyone else. And Richardson is kind of a personal preference situation. I'd be lying if I said that these S2 cognition scores don't have me kind of raising my eyebrows a little bit at CJ Stroud. I do think that, I've called CJ Stroud just an incredibly safe prospect over and over. And I've compared him to Dak Prescott and said that I think he's going to be a near carbon copy to Dak Prescott. And that Georgia, anytime I want to say, okay, maybe I'm a little too high on CJ Stroud, I go pop on that Georgia game. And he looked unbelievable. I mean, he played the best game of his career in the biggest moment of his career against the best defense that he ever faced. So that goes a long way with me. I try to not let one game impact my evaluation of somebody a lot. But that game, anytime I get really nervous about these cognition scores, anytime I get nervous about any of the reports out there about CJ Stroud, I just pop in that film for that game, and I am absolutely wowed. Now, you could say the same thing with Anthony Richardson, except the film that you're watching is the Combine. So it's a little different there with Richardson, but I'd be lying if I said that I'm not completely and utterly tantalized by the possibilities that Anthony Richardson brings to the franchise quarterback position if I was a GM. I think there's a lot of Josh Allen similarities, and obviously there's a lot of Cam Newton similarities, but there's a lot of Malik Willis similarities as well. I think he's a much better prospect than Willis was personally, but there's a lot of risk. I mean, you absolutely are signing up to make one of the riskier picks in the entire NFL draft if you're taking Richardson in the top 5 to 10 picks, which I think someone will. I think someone will make that pick. So how it broke for me, I have number 1 overall. I have CJ Stroud number 7 overall, and I have Anthony Richardson number 13 overall. So not a big gap there between Stroud and Richardson for me. I kind of wouldn't get too upset any way that anyone went at the quarterback position, unless you're taking Will Levis over either of those guys. And Shane Haff, who I do my NFL draft content with over at Bleeding Green Nation and Edge of Philly, he actually has Anthony Richardson as his number 2 overall player in the entire class and his QB1. And he's very adamant that if he was the Carolina Panthers, he would be drafting Anthony Richardson number 1 overall because of the traits, because of the combine score, and because of the upside that he brings to the position. So I completely understand what Anthony Richardson brings to the table. If I was making the call, I'd probably go with CJ Stroud.
Let's talk about the Eagles real quick. 10 overall is where they sit at currently, and that'll be their first pick in the draft. We've been talking a lot about defensive linemen. What defensive lineman do you think would be worth taking at 10? I've always wondered that because we've been throwing out names of guys and edge rushers and defensive tackles that could possibly be there at 10 and guys that they could take. But which ones would you say are worth drafting there at that 10 spot?
I mean, obviously taking Will Anderson out of the discussion because he will not be there. And honestly, taking Jalen Carter out of the discussion. I think we might have to.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that we much ado about nothing. It's kind of my stance on Jalen Carter right now. We all had all these conversations about how far he dropped. To me, it seems like it's a near lock that Seattle's picking him 5th overall at this point. So their GM has kind of tipped his hat a little bit. Maybe that's a smokescreen, but it seems like Jalen Carter's a Seahawk. So I'm assuming that Carter and Anderson are off the board. And if that's the case, there's really only 2 defensive linemen that are picking at 10 for me. At the first one I'll mention is Tyree Wilson, 6'6", 275, high level production over the last year at Texas Tech after transferring from A&M. 14 sacks and 27.5 tackles for loss over the last 2 years. Top 4 in pressure rate. He's got fun plays on tape where he just straight up pushes O-linemen into quarterbacks or into ball carriers, which is always a crowd pleaser. He doesn't have the bend that a lot of people are looking for, but in terms of the guys that I look at the edge position, I almost always go for the traits and the size and the strength and the speed a little bit over bend and maybe over a bag when it comes to pass rushing moves. I think Tyree Wilson's an athletic freak, and I would absolutely take him and hope that he lives up to the draft comps of Chandler Jones and Jason Hall, because he very much is of that mold. He would very much be worth taking at 10. I think he'll go in the top 9. But there's a chance if it goes quarterback crazy and offensive linemen get pushed up the board, maybe someone takes a receiver. JSN is rising up the board, so there's a chance he's there. And then the guy I think I've talked about on this show, and I think I've talked about on any show that I've been on, is my guy of the 2023 NFL draft, and it's Myles Murphy from Clemson. I truly don't understand the negativity that has gained steam revolving around Murphy. He's an absolute freak with tremendous size. He's 6'4.5" at 268 pounds, posted a 9.71 relative athletic score, ran a 4.53 in the 40, had a very productive 3 years, never was questionable, never was on an injury report, had zero durability concerns. This is a guy to me who checks all of the athletic and physical boxes. He also, in my opinion, has the highest motor in the entire draft. This guy does not quit on plays. And people are trying to make up unquantifiable nonsense about his upside. He's a top 5 player in this draft class, in my opinion. I think the close player comp as a prospect athletically to Bradley Chubb, who was drafted 5th out of NC State in 2018. They have a really near identical spider chart. He's more of a D lineman than Chubb was. But I think his worst case NFL scenario is he turns into a Rashawn Gary type of player. Rashawn Gary's had 20.5 sacks over the first 3 years of his career while being a guy who can play all 3 downs because he's a good run stopper. Myles Murphy's just as good against the run as he is against the pass. He just checks every box for me. And it feels to me also like Myles, there's been a lot of talk with me and on my podcast where we discussed whether or not the Eagles are drafting with a win now mentality or this year, or are they still keeping, as Sam Hinkie would say, the longest view in the room. I think you can blend the two together. And I think Myles Murphy is a perfect example of that, because I think Myles Murphy has the ability to contribute right away in the Eagles' rotational defensive line, and he's really versatile. You can use him in different ways. But I think he also has that long-term upside that you're searching for when you're using a top 10 pick on a defensive lineman. So to me, Myles Murphy is my dream scenario at number 10 for the Eagles, or even trading back a little bit.
One conversation I've been starting to see a little bit is surrounding Jahmyr Gibbs and where he's going to be taken, and could he be, maybe the best running back of this draft class? I know Bijan Robinson is the guy that I think is special and should be getting that mark, but there seems to be a lot of love for Jahmyr Gibbs. Where do you stand with him, and is that a guy that could make his way into the first round?
Yeah, he definitely could. It depends where Bijan goes, because I think the Bijan alley, if Eagles don't take him or if someone doesn't move up for him, it really starts at 19. And then there's a couple places that you can see between about 19 and 30 that could make sense to Bijan, whether that be Tampa at 19, whether that be, I've seen people speculate about Baltimore. I've seen people speculate. I think everyone would say Dallas. If he's there for Dallas, it just seems like a very Jerry Jones move if Bijan were to fall that far. But let's say someone trades up for Bijan. Let's say he goes 10. Let's say he goes 19. Then those teams in that range, the Dallas Cowboys, the Cincinnati Bengals, who Joe Mixon might be on the way out, the Buffalo Bills, who have been searching for a running back for years, I could absolutely see one of those teams drafting Jahmyr Gibbs. And Kansas City is actually another team that it's been said is very, very high on Jahmyr Gibbs. It seems like they are almost narrowed down between Jahmyr Gibbs and I believe it was Zay Flowers. But when I watch Gibbs, I see 3 scenarios in terms of an NFL player comp for his career. And sorry if I'm leaning too hard on the player comps. I'm writing an article for the Influencers. So these are all these are all fresh in my brain. But Jahmyr Gibbs, if the best case scenario for Jahmyr Gibbs, and a lot of people have talked about it, so I'm not breaking news, but it's Alvin Kamara. I mean, when you squint, you could see him becoming an Alvin Kamara level impactful player, and that's, Pro Bowl, all-pro type of guy. That's the best case scenario. I think the most likely scenario is the NFL version of Reggie Bush, specifically from Miami and Detroit and in his early New Orleans years. I think people forget because it's almost, I feel like he was a disappointment as a pro. But people forget he was probably like a top 15 running back for a good stretch of time, Reggie Bush. You look at his stats, they're actually a lot more impressive now.
Yeah, he ended up being a good
remembered.
NFL player. Yeah, he was really good.
Yeah. He had really good years in New Orleans early, and then he kind of faded out because they had so many backs there with Ingram and him and someone that I'm forgetting. Sproles. And then he went to Miami and Detroit. He had good years at both places. Some as more of a workhorse guy, and some as a bit more of just a receiving back. So I think we could see the same thing out of Gibbs. The worst case scenario and the fear with Jahmyr is that he's CJ Spiller. That he's a guy who is exciting in spurts, maybe has some injury issues due to being small, but the guy who maybe can't be a workhorse ever. Maybe is only a situational player. There's definitely some concerns about that with Jahmyr Gibbs, but Alabama used him to the fullest of his abilities, and I'm just in a very similar way to Jalen, who probably one of my guys, quote unquote, of this year is Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee. People use Jalen Hyatt in such specific ways that it's hard to really know, how realistic it is for the NFL. Well, guess what? I don't think Josh Heupel is the only guy who figured out that Jalen Hyatt's fast. Like, I think other NFL play callers will be able to call plays for a fast guy. We've seen it before. And I feel the same way about Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't think Nick Saban and Bill O'Brien are the only people on the planet who found Jahmyr Gibbs' speed to be something that they use in their offense. I think if you draft him, I think Cincinnati, Buffalo, Dallas, all the teams that I mentioned would have a pretty easy out of them in terms of getting him into the offense and using him as a blocker, using him as a receiver, using him as a runner outside of the tackles. You can use Gibbs in a lot of ways. He's funny enough, though, I say all that. I don't think he's a great fit for the Eagles. I don't think he makes a lot of sense at 30 for the Eagles. I have him one spot ahead of Charbonnet on my overall rankings, but for the Eagles specifically, I think Zach Charbonnet makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he slots perfectly in with Gainwell and with Penny, whereas Gibbs has a lot of similarities to Gainwell. He's a little bigger. He's a better player than Gainwell, in my opinion, but there are a lot of similarities. And if you want to continue using Gainwell in a similar way to how they kind of did closing the year, wouldn't make much sense to bring in a similar player. Zach Charbonnet is not similar to anybody we have on the roster. So I think Charbonnet makes a lot of sense. Chip Kelly, UCLA running back, one of my favorite players to watch in this draft. And he's a guy I've liked watching at UCLA for a long time now, dating back to a few years ago. So it reminds me a lot of DeMarco Murray, which if you're an Eagles fan, you're going to shudder when you hear that. But there's some James Conner in there as well in terms of the way that you don't think that a back like Zach Charbonnet between the tackles guy is going to have the receiving ability that he does. But when he gets out in space, his hands, he can really flash some hands. So I really like Charbonnet as an option for the Eagles at 62 in the second round, or moving up potentially in the second round.
So you talked about some wide receivers there as well. And so I've been hearing a bit of Jackson and Jigma Smith possibly at 10. I think if you've mentioned it, you said that's the best receiver in the draft class for you, and he fits kind of that role of the slot receiver that the Eagles are needing. So there seems to be a bit of emphasis on that third wide receiver. If they don't, let's say, get in Jigba Smith, or Smith and Jigba, would they go possibly, is there another slot receiver that they could look at, maybe at 30, or if they can get in the second round somehow? What would those receivers be if they were looking at that number 3 and they obviously don't get the top guy?
Yeah, no, I think you can bank on the fact that the Eagles will draft a receiver with one of their first 5 picks in the draft. Howie Roseman loves drafting wide receivers. He's done it more than just about anybody over
Put an
the
emphasis on that, which
years.
has always been surprising because the Eagles never used to do that. So it's been real surprising and a good surprise.
I think he's adjusted with the times.
Yeah.
And I think that wide receiver, you look at the way that it's being paid out, it's become a premier position in the league. I think people are finally realizing how important it is to help out your quarterbacks. Go figure. But JSN obviously is a guy that I absolutely love. And, besides the defensive linemen that we just talked about, the 4 big names, he's the only other guy that would make me excited. There's 5 guys that could get me excited with a pick at 10. It's the 4 defensive linemen we discussed, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's been my personal, probably him and Miles Murphy are my favorite NFL draft prospects for a long time now. He combines shades and traits of a lot of my favorite receivers league wide. This was a guy who I think he's a borderline top 5 player in the draft. He's getting tagged as strictly a slot receiver without realizing he was playing with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Marvin Harrison Jr. I've been comparing him to route running as Devontae Smith and Tyler Lockett. This is the one that stopped me dead in my tracks and even asked myself if I'm high enough on Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I have him 6th overall, higher than anyone else I've seen personally. But Eric Edholm, the lead draft analyst for NFL.com, who actually gave me a follow recently. Shout out Eric Edholm. But he made the comparison on the Around the NFL podcast. And ever since I can't get out of my brain, they're within an inch and 8 pounds of each other in terms of frame. They tested pretty much exactly the same at the combine. What if Jackson Smith and Jig was just Cooper Kupp? I mean, the way that he's able to move in a phone booth and the way he's able to get open and separate against any type of corner. I mean, I think that they are going to be like, if he turns into a Cooper Kupp-like player, then we're not talking nearly about him. To the people out there, they're saying this draft doesn't have a wide receiver 1. They are mistaken. But if it's not going to be him, if they're going to take a guy at 30 or maybe 62, I think Jalen Hyatt makes a lot of sense. He's a guy who, with his size and with his speed, you could slot him right into what Quez Watkins has been doing for the Eagles, and he can actually catch the ball. So that would help a lot with what they have in the slot. Josh Downs, a 5'9" receiver, kind of really interesting player because he succeeded with Drake May, but he also Sam Howell. I always like to see a receiver like a CeeDee Lamb who can produce as one option in an offense with multiple quarterbacks. It just shows that he's able to adjust to different types of guys. Josh Downs reminds me a lot of a prospect to Jahan Dotson from last year. So you slide Jahan Dotson into the Eagles offense as number 3 wide receiver. I think that would make a lot of sense. So Josh Downs, he's an option at 30, maybe even trading up in the 2nd round. If you're waiting a little longer, then maybe we're talking about it in like the 2nd or 3rd round. Maybe we're talking about a Tank Nathaniel Dell from Houston, tinier player. I've been fooled by Tank Dell type players in the past. I don't want to do it again. I've fallen for the tiny, speedy guys from low levels colleges who are super productive at the college level, maybe not athletic enough to be at the NFL level. That could be a problem. A name that I'm not all that high on is Marvin Mims. He's a relative of Denzel Mims, a player I really liked a few years ago who hasn't panned out. But Shane Haas, Marvin Mims, we're going to be doing our My Guys podcast tonight for BGN, and Marvin Mims is one of his guys, and he is a slot receiver. He's very fast, a deep threat, so he would make sense theoretically to fit in as that wide receiver 3 for the Eagles, maybe a 2nd or a 3rd rounder. I'm not personally all that high on him. I don't think he has a wide route tree, but can definitely run the fly route, so maybe that's what they want him to do. So a lot of options at the wide receiver position for the Eagles. I think it's been undersold as a wide receiver class.
Talking with Mark Henry Jr. You can follow him at Mark Henry Jr. _ And if you follow him, you saw that he was not pleased with the way that I assessed the Aaron Rodgers trade to the New York Jets. So I will get your assessment first. Why do you not like the Jets trading for Rodgers?
Well, no, it's not that I don't like them trading for him, because I kind of have figured that he would be trading for him. But I've been talking for weeks on Twitter and on the podcast about, well, I assumed that they were going to be giving up the 13th pick for Aaron Rodgers, and maybe they'd get it back. And I assumed that was what was holding it up. And when I was putting that out there, people were telling me, what, are you crazy? They're not getting a 1st-round pick for Aaron Rodgers when they have – I was like, all right, maybe they'll get a 1st-rounder. Maybe they'll just get like a 2nd and a 4th, or maybe that, whatever. And it comes out that I'll simplify the trade for people. Get rid of the 5th and the 6th pick. That's a wash. Get rid of 13 and 15, honestly. Get rid of trading up from 15 to 13. That's basically a wash. What the Packers got in this trade is they got a 2nd rounder, and then next year they got a 2nd that can be a 1st. I would rather that than even pick 13. So if the holdup was that they wouldn't offer pick 13, the Jets should have just offered pick 13, because I'd rather just be done with it this year. You're rolling the dice or going the future unscathed. They didn't do that. They could be giving up their first next year, regardless of how this season. Quarterback an 8-9 team this year. It's not like this is an automatic 12. The Jets are better than the Packers. I do think the Jets are actually a contender. So it's less. I don't actually think they're going to win 8 games again or win 9 games again. I do think they'll be very good as long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy and doesn't fall off the cliff due to age. But I do think all of this time, this is what they ended up giving up when they could have just given up 13. That's kind of where I'm at. If I'm a Packers fan, I'm absolutely ecstatic that I got to move up 2 picks in the draft and that I got a second-round pick, and that now Packers fans got the fun of what we got to do with Carson Wentz. It probably won't be as fun, but they now get to root against Aaron Rodgers. And I know a lot of Packers fans probably love him. A lot of Packers fans probably
they have to. At the end of the day, I know he's been annoying for them, and he really has been. Like the last couple of years have been truly annoying.
So annoying.
Yeah, and so I bet Packers fans feel that in the same way with Brett Favre. But at the end of the day, I think obviously they big fans of Rodgers and what he did for that organization.
Yeah, you won't even remember it really. But right now, the last 3 or 4 years that Rodgers has put the Green Bay fans through, like I know, just for example, the Trill Withers show, really good podcast. The one guy on there, his Twitter is at Most Crucified. He is a big Green Bay Packers fan, and he's like so sick of Rodgers, and they like the celebration on the show today because they finally traded him. So I do think that there is that section out there that are like, man, I'm glad to be rooting for like a football team and not like a soap opera every week and having to wait for the Pat McAfee show to see what Aaron Rodgers said this week about vaccines or whatever the new hot topic is. Like, I do think there's probably an aspect of it that's like, you know what? Like, we've had good quarterback play for 35 years. Like, let's see what Jordan Love has. Like, let's move on. I think I'd feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way in that Aaron Rodgers has been annoying, and I hate watching it play out every single week, what feels like has been for 2 years. But finally it happens, and now we just get to talk about whether or not it's actually going to work out with Rodgers and the Jets. I think it does in a way. I think it's going to be good, and especially I think a vulnerable, not a bad AFC East, but certainly a vulnerable one. So I think it's going to be interesting. But Mark, it's going to be interesting all week as we get closer to the draft and we get all the news that comes out, and I can't wait to talk with you all about it. I know Friday I have you locked in. I don't know in studio yet or not, but it's definitely going to be Friday I have you on, and we're going to have a lot of draft stuff to talk about, recapping day 1 and, of course, previewing day 2. So looking forward to it. But, Mark, thank you for joining me tonight on The Line Change.
Miles Murphy country. Let's
ride. That is Mark Henry Jr. Follow him at Mark Henry Jr. _ And again, yeah, that NFL draft coverage is going to be great for the Daily Ticket on Friday. But of course, Thursday we have NFL draft coverage as well. All right, more Line Change coming up next here on The Gambler.
Getting you ready for all of the weekend's action. It's sports here, there, and everywhere with Dick Girardi and Mike Kern live from the Parks Casino Sportsbook.
I'm just glad because the beat probably should have been tossed, but Nick Claxton, I'm glad